Hi, this is the Magnificent Midlife podcast, and I'm Rachel Lancaster. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started, and the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now is our time. Hello and welcome. This is a very exciting day because today I am recording episode 150 of this podcast, which I can't quite believe. And I have a very special guest to celebrate with me, and that is Ann Marie McQueen. And she is a journalist on the world stage focused on menopause, and she's on a mission to cut through misleading narratives and dodgy data. Regular listeners will know I don't like dodgy data. She founded Hot Flash Inc. in 2020 to cover the latest clinical studies, treatments, products, guidance, and more via a weekly research letter, podcast, and across social media. She's one of the founder members of Menoclarity. I am delighted to tell you as well. So I am constantly inspired by Ann Marie and her dedication to finding the true truth. I love that phrase, the true truth. We're going to talk about the truth today. So I'm delighted that she's here. Welcome, Ann Marie.
Oh, it's so good to see you. And I love anytime we get to talk. So I'm happy to do it in a podcast or on a boat or on a train, whatever. I love talking to you.
We've never met, have we?
No.
This is the amazing thing. We've never met in real life, but we're changing the world together, which I think is rather cool, really.
Yeah. I did not anticipate this when I set out to do a newsletter in 2020. I did not anticipate this at all. I read this book at my brother's house one day called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And I read it because it was on his shelf, and it was always a joke by this British girl I worked with here in Abu Dhabi. And it was her phrase that she said to make fun of my tendencies to self-help. And when I read the book, it said when we are embarking on new things, we can only think of what's going wrong. We can never think of the goodies. And this is just an example of I just never anticipated connecting with other people and what that would mean. It's the most amazing thing.
I know. Menopause has done it for both of us, hasn't it? It was like, wow. Well, it started a bit shit, but then it's got pretty good after that.
Yeah, but things really a good. We've sort of made a real purpose out of it.
I know. To reframe it, to change the narratives and to embrace it all, because, I would never have met you if I wasn't doing this. And I am just so delighted to have you in my orbit. And when
Same.
I can say, when you agreed to be part of Menoclarity, I know you talked, sorry, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but just by way of example, so Menoclarity is this information hub that we've set up, a group of us have set up to try and change the negative narratives around menopause and to try and get the true truth about menopause out there and not just cherry pick, research that suits certain narratives, etc., etc. But you as a journalist, I know you had some thoughts about whether or not you were going to join because you are so focused on finding the true truth and being objective and not being swayed one way or the other. But you felt that what we were doing with Menoclarity was exactly that. And that to me was a stamp of approval, as to what we were trying to achieve. So that was just brilliant. So I'm just putting that out there. But anyway, let's start with you. So out of all the things that you could have made your mission in life, why has menopause become your focus?
Oh, it's funny, isn't it? I think about that all the time. I just, basically had a hellish 40s and didn't know why. And I hit menopause with, I feel like every hard thing or many of the hard things that make it harder. And I didn't know I had it. So I was wandering around a lot for early 40s to 47, 48, just basically not knowing what was wrong with me. I was always thinking I was dying of something. I became a real hypochondriac. Not a hypochondriac. I had a lot of health anxiety at that point. And I saw a lot of doctors. I saw therapists. Basically, in my early 40s, I just developed like crashing anxiety and nightmares, fear of flying. Just sheets of fear would just rip through me for no reason. Usually when I was having fun, just like a sheet of fear would rip through me and a really nonsensical thought would come after, like your house is on fire or your family died and you don't know it yet, or like things like that. And trouble sleeping, just a lot of mood stuff. I remember having like almost tantrums, and my boyfriend at the time telling me I had to go to bed one night just because I was having a tantrum, basically. And then a lot of physical stuff, like a lot of like whooshing in my head and heart palpitations and chest pains and weird tingling on my body. And I was always asking other people, like, do you ever get this? And of course, everyone's saying no. Phantom smells. I used to smell burning all the time. And I would think, oh, what is happening to me? And so I was always at the doctor, or I was at the ER one night for chest pain, and they took it very seriously, had a full workup. Nothing was wrong. Ended up getting some therapy, which was helpful. Ended up doing a lot of things that were helpful. But it wasn't until I skipped a period that I knew exactly what was going on, right? Like the penny dropped. And there's a lot of people talking about, we didn't know about perimenopause. And that's true. I'm a health and wellness journalist. I knew about menopause. I just found a clipping that I wrote about it in 2007. So I clearly knew about it. There was no mention of perimenopause in that clipping at all. And I just thought, if I don't know anything about this, I'm a journalist who is focused on health for like a lot of my career, in and out of other beats, and really health and wellness for the sort of 10 years I've been in the Middle East. I had been in the Middle East by then. If I don't know about this, if I don't know about it, what hope would anyone else have of knowing anything about it? And then I started to look for information, and I just found I didn't like the information. It was not content. I'm like a crazy content person. I just love looking at all aspects of things. And I just couldn't find it. I found the information was, well, a lot like it is today, polarized and fear-mongering and maybe designed to make someone else money. And I just started thinking about doing a newsletter, and then it just grew from there because I knew we were onto something like this was going to sort of break open. I could just sort of see the signs. I felt I could see the signs, but then it definitely has since.
But it's broken open in a way that you and I are not very happy with, are we? It's just...
No. I mean, one of the reasons, like, I decided to join Mental Clarity because I need you guys. I had been watching on my own, and I'm like, this just doesn't seem right. Like this, as I started out not knowing very much about it, obviously, like we all do, and learning and having opinions that I changed and that sort of thing. But, I started sort of having my own awakening in the last years, and I just thought, this isn't right. Like everything being blamed on menopause. I saw the cherry picking of research. We've seen that so much in recent years, just people who don't know how research is conducted. They don't know the challenges. I know the beginnings of it, but I'm talking people who don't know anything about it, presenting research really irresponsibly. And it just seemed really wrong. And I just, the narrative that this is something that shouldn't be happening and needs to be corrected really benefits a lot of people, right? It's benefits people who are selling things to rectify that. And so I slowly started, I don't know, we just kind of found each other, and I have some other people I know around the world who feel the same, and we all feel varying degrees of it, that it's, I don't know how we can describe it, that it's just sort of been hijacked. And with the growth of social media and the growth of midlife women on social media, it's been hijacked by people who are very good at social media. And we just felt like this galloping negative narrative, particularly in the UK. That's where I was watching, and it hadn't started really in the US then, but it's definitely starting there too. So I was very, very grateful to connect with you, because you feel like you're going crazy when, I've always just been a really moderate person. Like I'm moderate, and I ask a lot of questions that annoy people. And so that's why I was so happy to find you. The Mental Clarity and anyone who's just sort of like, okay, let's all calm down here.
Well, on my walk this morning, I was listening to a podcast with Rangan Chatterjee and Jim Quick. Now, I've known about Jim Quick. He's a a sort of brain expert, in developing the power of the brain. But there were so many things in this podcast that resonated for the conversation we're having now. The thing that, what you take in is what then will become your narrative, and if you absorb all the negative news first thing in the morning, guess what? You're going to be stressed out about it for the rest of the day. And if we are absorbing all of these negative narratives about menopause, that we're broken, that we need fixing, that this is something abnormal and that our bodies have just gone wrong, then that doesn't help us. And this was something they were saying, if you're finding that what's going into your brain isn't actually helping you, then find something else, find an alternative narrative. And I think that is what's, partly behind what's driving me, and I think it is you as well, that we want to recalibrate. We want it to be more balanced. We don't want it to be so overwhelmingly bad, because yes, we both know it can be bad. You, I know, have had a really tough time, and you've had lots of other issues involved, and you've had issues with your mental health and everything else, which maybe we'll talk about. But even so, you do not subscribe to this thought that, you're wrong and you're not actually supposed to be going through menopause and it's a deficiency and you're just, on the fast track to disease for the rest of whatever sad life you've got left.
The amount of people who believe that is one of the things that alarms me the most, is this straight line drawn from menopause to disease.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. But I think I'd already woken up to this. I had a really life reckoning bunch of changes when I was around 47, like a terrible breakup, lost my job. I'd had another betrayal. It's sort of one of those midlife broken situations. And I put myself back together again by just watching really positive people who were my age or around my age. And some of them are men, like Will Smith, who's not fashionable to talk about it anymore, but like Gary Vaynerchuk, people that were really positive. And I slowly realized that the people I was surrounding myself with, who I was listening to, were completely affecting my frame of mind. And I was in a pretty toxic environment, a newsroom, which is also a super fun environment. But I was just around a lot of whingers and people who saw the negatives and everything. And I just started to realize my whole reality was framed in this way. Even when I moved to the UAE, I think it's one of the greatest experiences that I get to live here now. But when I moved here, I was surrounded by a bunch of people saying, they'll never do this and they'll never do that. And, a lot of that expat whinging about the way the country they've chosen to live in is run and conducted. And being surrounded by that, I just would have had a hugely different experience, and I am having it. So that's just a long-winded way of saying, I was able to realize that before. And so now I can clearly see it. And don't get me wrong, I can understand why people hang their hats on this, because if you find one of those people on social media who are telling you this is all about losing your hormones, all you need to do is replace your hormones, you must replace your hormones, and you may choose to replace your hormones. But if you're that's a simple solution, right? That's where everyone's looking for this simple solution outside themselves, the one thing that will fix it. And the people who have really blown up are the people who are really good at selling that message. We actually have research that if you have a negative view of menopause, your menopause experience will be worse. There's actual research, and no wonder, because there's tons of research that, how we view something frames how we experience it. So that is one of the, and social media is just such evidence of that, isn't it?
It is. It's awful. And that negativity around menopause will just extend to the whole aging process for the rest of our lives, because it's the first, well, it's not the first, because I think women suffer ageism certainly from 40 up, maybe even earlier sometimes these days. It's ridiculous. But if we have that negative approach to menopause, it's so tied to feeling negative about aging, and particularly as a woman, because women aren't allowed to age. And that is an Anglo-Saxon cultural thing. And I think that the positivity thing, I just wanted to pick up on that, that's a cultural thing as well, because I'm hoping that the US and Canada won't get as bad as the UK, because the UK, we are programmed to negativity.
You really are.
I mean, we really are.
It's shocking, Rachel.
but I'm the misfit.
Yeah, you're the outlier.
I've bought into the positivity because I used to live in America. I spent 3.5 years living in New York, and my son went to kindergarten. And then we moved back to London, and my son had 3.5 years in US daycare / kindergarten. And I think that has given him an incredible platform for life. Because yes, there are silly things that we don't like, and the Pledge of Allegiance and all of that stuff that the British will go, oh, I don't want that. But there were certain things, he has an innate sense of what he can achieve, which I do not see in British kids in the same way. He will tend towards the positive rather than tending towards the negative. And British, you've only got to look at the British tabloid press. I mean, goodness me.
Yeah.
The way we just pick on everything and make it negative, and yeah. So
it was really shocking.
I am the outlier.
You are. It was really shocking. I remember saying before I moved, oh, well, there's a lot of British people, because I came to launch the national newspaper. I was part of that team, and we had people from Canada, America, and Britain, namely, and then all over. There was like 250 of us. It was the coolest experience. It was like journalism frosh week. Do you have that in Britain? Frosh week, freshman week, fresher week?
Fresher week.
Yeah. But I was like, oh, it's going to be great because I love British people, and who won't be cheerful sitting around British people hearing all those accents. And after a couple of months, I mean, most of my friends were British, and gosh, so funny, right? Like complain. I always say, if you're going to complain, make it funny. But it was just really eye-opening for me. But I at the time, I didn't realize how much it was altering my experience. That's, sitting around, there was a lot of just sitting around and sort of, they're building these huge museums here. They've built the Louvre, and they're building the Guggenheim, and they're building the Zayed Museum. And those were conceived of before the sort of crash. And I just remember all the Brits saying, they'll never do it. They'll never do it. And when I drive around Abu Dhabi, I just love seeing them, because I'm like, I want to phone everyone up and say, look what they did. Anyway, that's enough about that. I love British people. I do. But there is that innate, like, limiting beliefs, tearing down others who are too, you see it in the Daily Mail, right? You see the subtle way and not so subtle ways it's done in the tabloids. And it's not cool these days to point out cultural differences between people. You sure can see them when you're an expat.
Well, yeah, because I've been an expat in China, and I've been an expat in America. So I love that expat window that we get, particularly on our own culture. I mean, I have all these theories that, expat communities are very conservative because they don't move on as the society moves on in the home country. They are stuck in their own little bubble. So they stay in that, and they become more and more conservative in their attitudes. Whereas the country that they came from may have moved on leaps and bounds, but they're not part of that. They're that removed. Anyway,
is that what's happened to me, Rachel? Is that what's happened?
No, because you're going back enough. You spent enough time in Canada. You're fine. Don't worry. Okay. And you probably don't have enough Canadians where you are to have an entrenched community, do you? I wouldn't have thought.
No, there's loads, but I just have some very close Canadian friends. I think there's 14,000 Canadians here, but I chose to not sort of hang around them when I moved here. Yeah, I was trying to not hang around Canadians. I was trying to hang around everyone else, but it turns out that a couple of my best friends are Canadian, so it's nice to touch base with them. But I would say we have become a little bit more conservative, to be honest. I'm not conservative. Sorry,
there was me saying my story, and I wasn't even thinking about how it might apply to you. Oops.
No, I mean, but also I think it's helped me just living abroad. I feel like that I wouldn't even be doing this if I had been in Canada, because first of all, being here just there's such a spirit of opportunity and possibility in the UAE, because there's quite a lot of money, and there's so many different people living here doing different things. But I think just having that view that you get when you leave your country and get different points of view helped me to really think differently. I've always thought differently. Like my editors I have one editor, Mitch, who always tells me that. He was a former editor of mine. He's like, he always thought differently. I think I gave him a bit of a headache for that reason. But yeah, I think being an expat has helped inform that.
Now, I know you have struggled with ill health. And have you been able to differentiate what is ill health and what is menopause, and how have you navigated that path in terms of trying to separate those things out?
It's really tough, and I still can't even really tell you, you know. I really am not separating this out. I thought I had full-blown perimenopause maybe about 2.5 years ago. Like terrible fatigue, bloating, like everything you hear about, brain fog, and really bad gut issues. But I've always had really bad gut issues since, I don't know, maybe 30. I've lived with IBS and really bad IBS. And so it's like, I just thought, oh, I'm really in this perimenopause. And I feel kind of bad because I would make videos because they're all perimenopause symptoms, right? Like there's over 100 perimenopause symptoms. And then I found out that I had SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And I had sort of the first signals of like blood sugar problems. I didn't know I had SIBO for 8 or 9 months. So and then it took me another 8 or 9 months to heal that. That's a pesky sort of a thing. And I had stress and you have to be calm. And I finally had to go on a liquid diet and I healed it and I was fine. And then I was good. Like I felt really, really good, but I was very, very careful about my diet and I wasn't even having any IBS. I was just feeling wonderful. And then a couple months later, I just developed like full blown leaky gut. And then I had a whole bunch of tests. I felt just awful. And that's when I put it all together because I was going to a hospital here and none of the doctors were talking and I didn't even know I had low thyroid. Someone said, get tested for Hashimoto's, which is a problem I never thought I would have. It turns out I have Hashimoto's, which is autoimmunity. I had the insulin resistance, the prediabetes. I'd already found out I had a fatty liver. It had gotten worse despite all my efforts. Like I'm a very healthy eater. I exercised. I did everything, but all of these things that were really bad. And I was very, very tired. I couldn't work. I had terrible brain fog, a terrible depression. This is about 8 or 9 months ago. And I was at a very low ebb and was sort of just not knowing what to do because when you have a bunch of doctors, everyone who's been through this has experienced this. We just have a bunch of doctors looking at you as some body parts, right? Like no one's talking, no one's putting it together. The gastroenterologist with a fatty liver is just treating me like I'm a Big Mac eating, couch surfing, laying type of person, you know? And I had always had I had weight that was like inflammation weight. And I would always say, I do not deserve this weight. And I'm sure every overweight person has said that. But I know more about my health and wellness. And I just felt like what I'm eating. So anyway, long and short of it, I found a really good integrative physician and she's helped me heal with. She's not into hormone therapy because I was about to go on hormone therapy to see if it would be helping me, but I've not been able to find anyone to help me get that here. And there's big supply chain issues, but she helped me. She's a homeopathic doctor, gut health specialist, integrative physician, even with counseling. She's just a wonderful doctor. I had to pay out of pocket for that. It was not cheap, but it was the best thing I ever did. And she said, look, you've got all these things. Like it was this huge list. You've got Hashimoto's, low thyroid, leaky gut, fatty liver, adrenal dysfunction, an adrenal lesion, prediabetes, then I can help you clean it all up. And I was like, okay, but she did. And I feel like 1,000 times better. I haven't had my tests. I don't know my levels yet. I'm going to be doing that soon. But I'm now in the process of like, okay, asking just what you said. What is perimenopause and what's not? I have the occasional hot flash now, but I had a lot more of them when I had a leaky gut, you know? My brain fog's still a little bit there, but it's pretty good. And I do a lot with my brain. Like I run 2 platforms, you know, there's too much going on. My brain's under a lot of pressure. So I don't know what's what, you know? So anyway, that's a long-winded, I don't know what is what, but I get nervous that there's undiagnosed autoimmunity, there's undiagnosed gut problems. I get nervous about people who've had gut problems like me for years. Basically, a lot of those problems were caused by me just being malnourished and my gut not working properly for decades. And the way I understand it, your body's so smart and it will run on backup pathways. I'm speaking very broadly about what goes on here, but it can only do that for like 10 or 15 years until the problems start to emerge. And so just like I suspected, my fatty liver does not have to do with me eating fatty foods and the standard American diet and high fructose corn syrup and all the things you'll hear when all those big functional doctors do podcasts about them. Like I get really mad when I hear like Mark Hyman saying, well, it's a standard American diet. There's a whole bunch of us that it's not. Like there are, because when I have spoken about this very briefly, I want to get this really sorted before I speak about it more. But when I have spoken about it, I've had trainers chime in and say, I have a fatty liver too, and I don't know why, you know? So I get really nervous about someone going on hormone therapy and having this stuff run in the background, because if your thyroid's not working, this is not good for your long-term health. If your liver is fatty and you don't know it, this is not good for your long-term health. Prediabetes is not good for you.
No. You've had so much to deal with, haven't you? And it's taken you a long time to sort of work everything out.
Yes. And I think the energy to do it when you're not feeling well it feels like it's the most difficult thing in the world to find it, you know, to have the will to do it.
But there's something else, isn't there? And I said I wanted to talk to you about this, and you said it was okay, and I hope it is. But you had a massive trauma in your 20s when your mum died. And you have been very public. And this is why I said at the beginning that, you know, just when I think you've inspired me enough, there you go, inspiring me again. You did an incredible podcast about how this year you have turned the age at which your mother died and how that influenced all of your life, everything that you did, the way you lived your life, what you felt you needed to do, the way you pushed yourself, the way you haven't planned for a retirement. And I would recommend that everybody go and listen to that podcast, because I dare you not to be in tears by the end of it, but it is phenomenal. It is phenomenal. So hats off to you, Ann Marie, for doing that. But that is the other thing, isn't it? And that, I think, I mean, your trauma is massive, but a lot of us carry something. And midlife and menopause, you talk about menopause now as the hero's journey, and that process of discovery, of leaning into it and working out what's going on, I think it's so important, isn't it?
It's important for everyone, not just women. You know, I'm single, I've done dating, and men in their 40s are not okay. You know, I've met some really neat men who have been really honest about their struggles. And so it's not just us. Like, we bring to our 40s this package of whatever it is we went through. And, you know, there's research that adverse childhood experiences, you know, trauma or whatever you want to call it, does influence and make menopause symptoms more troublesome. And that makes sense, you know, and people don't like to think, like, certainly in the therapy and work I've done, people don't like to think they had trauma in their childhood, right? Because no one ever wants to admit that things weren't good, especially if your parents were like nice, you know, and you weren't chained to a radiator. I always say you didn't have to be chained to a radiator. But you know, everyone's got things in their childhood that were not great, you know. It depends at what age you were at. It depends what sibling you were. And there's lots of information about how that informs you. But I think if you I entered my 40s as a person who, you know, obviously I developed those gut issues after my mom died. And when I really entered my journalism career, which is a very difficult career, right? Like, there's a ton of pressure. It's public. Your mistakes are public. It's sort of cutthroat. It's toxic. It can be toxic in the newsroom. It's just all sorts. I saw horrible things, you know, in my, like, horrible things that I never want to think about, that, like, it was too hard for me. I'm too sensitive to have to go out to, like, accidents right after they happen and see the things that I saw. And so all of that was happening. And then I just became a person who just didn't process my emotions. Like, I just didn't. And so many people are like that. And so whether it's drinking or working hard or exercising too hard, putting yourself on restrictive eating plans, I did all of these things to try and feel better and to outrun this these feelings. And I think by the time you get to your 40s, this is why people start acting so weird, because they've got like a lid on a pot that's boiling over, right?
Yes.
And even a guy I was dating said, it's like the vault is full, like, because I said, well, you didn't have these problems with your other partner that, and he said, yeah, but the vault wasn't full, which I thought it was so cool the way he said
That's
it.
That's a very good analogy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the hero's journey is like the call to unpack all this and get to the bottom of whatever it is that you've brought here, that even just learning how to feel a negative emotion and sit with it, and understanding that it doesn't stick around for that long, crying of the grief, whatever you need to do. So many people don't want to do this. And one of the weirdest conversations I've had, I was thinking about this today. One of the weirdest conversations I have had with someone was with a CEO of a hormone therapy company who wanted to talk to me about, basically why I don't talk about hormone therapy more. And, this person's message was like, who has time for that, Ann Marie? Like, who has time for that work? And no one has time for it. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, you mean you don't have time for the work of being a human? Like, I don't know, whatever you believe, I'm kind of a spiritual person. So I do believe we're sort of souls sent here to live in these human bodies. Now I can sort of feel that more and more, but it's very freeing to do this work. It's hard, but it's worth it. And so that's why I say the hero's journey. And then I think menopause is just a time, and perimenopause is just a time to highlight like all the things you got to fix. The things you sort of got to address to go move on and be a happy, healthy old lady. And that's what makes me so mad when they draw the line with disease. Someone could look at me and say, but Ann Marie, you're not, your health fell apart because when you hit perimenopause. But it's sort of like, yes, you become more vulnerable, but I don't, it's not a direct line. It's just an opportunity almost. That's how I see it. It's not a certainty. It's just, it's so wrong the way it's being portrayed as you hit this wall and then you just like explode. But it also kind of felt like that.
Yeah, but thank goodness you're coming through it, which is huge and great. We were at a launch recently for the British Standards Institute Menopause Standard, and somebody was up there talking about how pre-menopause we've probably had 31 or 37 average number of years that we've been fertile. Whether or not we've had children, we've been having periods for that time. And if you look then, and I was talking about this, look at average life expectancy. Well, hopefully we've still got the same amount of time not being fertile as we had being fertile. And what are we supposed to be? Just sick for the rest of it? I don't understand this narrative that, menopause is now. It's interesting because when I was given the early menopause diagnosis at 41, I honestly responded as if it was the end of meaningful life. And that is still the narrative. In fact, it's worse now. That was the narrative in my head. Whereas now it seems to be the narrative that unless you take the drugs and therefore you're on the drugs, possibly from puberty to, grave, you're on hormones because we're faulty without them. It just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense, and some of the things they were talking about this morning is like, the man was talking about who was his favourite super person. And he said Spider-Man, and then the other person said, with great power comes great responsibility. And Jim Quick he had a brain injury when he was small, and he always likes to turn things around. So he was saying, with great responsibility comes great power. And if we take responsibility in midlife and through menopause, instead of being a victim, it's not happening to us. I believe it happens for us, as we've been talking about. Then we have great power to make a difference, to change, to take responsibility for our health. Instead of just like your HRT man said, well, who has time? Well, who can afford not to have the time?
Yeah, if you don't, a lot of us go through life without taking responsibility for ourselves. And I've never been married, but I have noticed how many of my friends will blame their spouse for, not being there in this or that way. And and I know when I'm in a relationship how easy that is to do, right? Like, it's just so easy to just put it outside of yourself. It is the time to accept radical responsibility for every aspect. And it's a huge calling, and it's a really big job. Like even the last 8 or 9 months, like this has just been very difficult for me. When you talk about retirement, like I've been on a huge money journey, because I guess I always just was resentful that I just felt that if there was a man here, that I would have made a plan and been a better saver and would be like wealthy and would have someone to share these difficult decisions that I've had to make. And it's like, I just realized like that's just an idea I have in my head. Like I have friends who say, "Oh, not necessarily," right? Like
my
I'm just
husband's
imagining.
my husband's will is still not final.
Okay.
And if he listens
Right?
to this,
Like,
okay, he signed one, but it had the wrong date on it, and it took him 5 years to do that. So
yeah.
no, that's a complete
Yeah.
fallacy.
Yeah. Always. Yeah. So taking responsibility is absolutely fundamental, but it's the job. It's our job. It's so easy not to do now. It's just so easy not to do, but you do it at your peril, because even when you're going through like a medical journey, taking responsibility for yourself is not going to the doctor. It's sitting at the doctor and like taking notes and asking questions and challenging the doctor. You know, I went to the worst endocrinologist. He didn't even tell me that I had low thyroid the last time we did the blood test. I already had it. And I had to badger him and like bully him to get a test for the Hashimoto's. He didn't care about it. I asked him if it was connected to my fatty liver. Nope. Like he was terrible. And when I got my new doctor, she said, he didn't give you any medication for your thyroid. Like you should not be walking around like this. Don't ever go back to him. And I had a feeling, about it, but it's just easier to go and not challenge the things that you feel in your gut aren't quite right, that don't make common sense, like my gastroenterologist that was sort of like looking at me like I was an overweight person who wasn't responsible. Like I had conversations with him and he was like, okay, like it just takes so many different things. It takes having the confidence in yourself and self-belief to pay attention to those little nudges and intuitions, keeping records of your health. Like I think everyone should have all the tests when they're like 37, 35, and then just keep all of their stats for themselves. So like basically it's so easy now to understand what the various tests are for. But so many of us will be like, I don't even know what that is. I just think if you had your own spreadsheet and you kept that once a year, once every 2 years, then you could start to see how things were going. It's not a mystery. It's sort of like your car, like I learned a little bit about how my car works, and now going to my mechanic isn't really that bad because I can go and say, yeah, I thought that's what it was. I don't feel like he's bamboozling me, but this is a lot of work.
Yeah, it is a lot of work. But fortunately, we have people like you to cut through all of the crap and give us the short version. So, your Substack and your podcast, this is exactly what you're doing. You're providing this information for women so that they have brilliant health information without having to wade through it all. So what are some of the things that
I was going to say sometimes I feel like I make it more complicated. Because it is more complicated than it's being sold to be, is what I'm saying. So that's just one thing.
But that's good complicated, isn't it? That's true truth. That's the whole point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's no point in trying to simplify something if it's not true. Or if it's a version of the truth that doesn't stack up.
Right. And it's taken me a long time to spot some of the things. So you wanted to know what some of the things were that I've seen that I'm pretty sure of, Yeah. And definitely one of them is that, and I base all my stuff on a mixture of evidence, experts, and human experience, because I think way too many people discount human experience. And we could talk I like woo-woo stuff too. So that's kind of stuff isn't studied, and you have to just sort of measure out how you felt after. But I've got to try a lot of that stuff in my life that a lot of people haven't. For sure, the conversation about hormone therapy perplexes me so much because I don't feel that the research has been done correctly. You have all these mixed results about, you have people claiming that it prevents disease. Dementia and cardiovascular disease. You have these camps that just say it like it's fact, even though no guiding body in the world has recommended hormone therapy to prevent cardiovascular disease or dementia. And I think a lot of the problem is with the research, because people are just studying hormone therapy in women, not bioidentical hormone therapy and synthetic hormone therapy. And we have the indications now that it's the progestogens, the progestin, the synthetic progestins that are causing the problems. And you have these camps, like I just call them estrogen maximalists, like estrogen will fix everything, estrogen, estrogen, estrogen. And some people, like, why is estrogen the one that gets all of the attention? I think this is just because they started talking about it first. I really don't know. But, this is the camp that's like, you need to replace your estrogen or you're going to fall off your chair. And for a long time it was like, does estrogen cause breast cancer? Is estrogen is the devil? That doesn't really make sense. We make estrogen. Why would it cause cancer in us? But anyways, it seems to be that the progestin is the thing to be concerned about. Now, I think that's quite problematic because progestin, synthetic progesterone, versus progesterone, which is available in a cream or oral micronized form. If you're taking estrogen, you need oral micronized progesterone, not a cream. You need the progesterone to offset the estrogen so it doesn't thicken your uterine lining. But it's very problematic, as you can imagine, because there's so many women on the birth control pill. There's so many people who have coils that have progestin in them. There's so many people on synthetic hormone therapy. So we've got these estrogen maximalists who are now happy to blame progestin, right? And then we have other people saying, I don't believe in the demonization of progestin. And then it's kind of a mess. And then you have research, very little research that's just on bioidenticals. And someone said to me recently, like, until we have that, someone really smart said to me recently, until we have that research, we're kind of at sea. And any sort of increased risk from the progestin is always downplayed, like it's 1 case per 1,000. It's, da-da-da-da-da. And I don't like to see risks downplayed like that, because if you're the person who ends up getting something because you took a side effect because you took hormone therapy, you're not going to be very happy about it. And in the last couple of months, I know someone who had deep vein thrombosis, someone who developed a cyst, and someone who developed breast cancer after going on hormone therapy. Correlation doesn't mean causation, but these things do happen, and people need to be aware when they go on them. And the other question I really have, and the integrative physicians have a much more of a beat on this, is how we're metabolizing our estrogen. There's a good way and there's a couple of bad ways. And it makes a lot of sense that if you're not metabolizing your progestin or your estrogen, that can lead to fibroids, that can lead to cysts, and that can lead to certain cancers because estrogen makes things grow. And that is opening up a whole other can of worms that you should probably get that kind of stuff tested before you go on hormone therapy. There's a school of thought that's like you should get a DNA testing, Dutch testing before you go on hormone therapy to make sure your body is processing it in a way and excreting it rather than keeping it in and keeping it circulating. And that's very controversial to talk about. And I don't really like to talk about it because I don't like women who haven't done that to go, oh my God, And the risk from that could be very low as well. But that's really one of the most interesting areas to me.
Wow, there's a lot to consider, isn't there? Mm-hmm. I have this approach that, I went on HRT at about 44 and I came off at 51 because I was told to come off it at 51. And I was on the bioidentical because I'd really pushed to be on the bioidentical because back then I knew enough. I, could do the research. Most people don't do the research. They don't know. And that's the worrying thing. We put out these things and people don't question it. But I was told by Dr. Nick Panay's team, and he's, a serious menopause consultant in the UK, and it was his team at Queen Charlotte's Hospital, and they said, if you're okay, then come off it at so-called average menopause age, which is 51, because what we're doing is we're replacing the hormones that you should have had until you went to normal menopause age, but it happened early, therefore that was why you need to be on them. But when you hit average menopause age, you're designed to have a different hormonal profile. We're not supposed to have the same hormonal profile as a post-reproductive woman as we had when we were a reproductive woman, and the body has a plan, but we try and mess with it and we think that we're wrong. And yes, it goes back to this, people not wanting to do the work, and also we're living in a different society now. Our food is different. There's more pollution in the world. There's all sorts of things, aren't there, going on? But any medication has an effect and it has a side effect. And maybe we just don't want the side effects or the potential for the side effects.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear that, because obviously going through early menopause or surgical menopause is a completely different story. Like, there's loads of research that, we can lose our hormones gradually at the time we were meant to lose them, but you can't lose them all at once. First of all, it makes your life very difficult, or it can. And then it boosts your risk factors for all sorts of things. So that's very interesting. But what's interesting to me is that goes against everything we hear, right? Like, they're telling you
now, I know.
Yeah. They're telling you to come off them at the time. Like, yeah, we kept you to this age, but now's when you're supposed to be going on and go off. So such a different approach, right? Because there are people now that would be like, well, why would you go off them? Now is when you need to stay on it, because now, going off them, then you'll put yourself into a menopausal state, and that's a terrible state to be in. So that's really interesting to hear. It's just, it's very individual, but there are definitely two camps, where there's a camp that's like, you're not supposed to be losing these and it's awful and we have to replace it. And another camp that's like, this is a natural process and maybe you want to, maybe you don't. But those people that really believe that it prevents dementia and Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease are very strident, but the data is not there. So every time I see that, I just think, the data is not there. I'm also very concerned about things that aren't discussed. I'm very concerned about women going on hormone therapy when they have risk factors for many of these diseases and thinking that hormone therapy will prevent it, right? So what bugs me about the prevents dementia conversation is you don't go on hormone therapy and it stops you from getting dementia. There are dementia reversing protocols and slowing down dementia protocols, like Dr. Dale Bredesen, who's written The End of Alzheimer's. He has these protocols. And estrogen therapy may be like one of many, 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 many things that you do. So it could help. But what concerns me is if you're going on hormone therapy and you're overweight, you're going on hormone therapy and you drink daily, you're going on hormone therapy and you have an autoimmune condition running in the background, you have prediabetes. Yes, all hormone therapy is touted as a miracle for many of these things. It can help you. It can help your gut health. It can help your insulin resistance. It can help all those things. But no one talks about drinking in hormone therapy.
Oh, I know.
And
I know.
It's very interesting. And only very few people have said to me, forward-thinking people are saying on social media or have said to me, I just don't like the idea of people drinking with hormone therapy. It's just common sense, right? And I think people are going on hormone therapy feeling better and then drinking more.
Well, I think there is an aspect of the hormone therapy giving you a free pass.
Yes.
I spoke to one woman who said, I didn't have any symptoms, but I had fear of missing out. So I thought I needed to be on it. And actually, I was on it primarily because I didn't like the way my face was changing. And I read your book, and she said, I read your book and I came off. and so because she realised eventually, why was she on it? One, fear of missing out. She didn't really have any symptoms. And two, because she didn't really like aging, which is why I know that this fear of aging is so wrapped up in how we approach menopause, and the reason why it's being touted as, something wrong and we're broken, we have to have the hormones, because we're fearful of moving to that non-reproductive phase because society doesn't value that non-reproductive phase. So we try and put the Band-Aid on and be as close to the reproductive phase as we possibly can be, It's all tied up in it. You can't, trying to pull out ageism from the menopause discussion's just not going to work. And people don't want to acknowledge that. But that is, I think, a massive part of the whole conversation, the whole way. That was, the Robert A. Wilson book in 1966, Feminine Forever. It was about keeping women as they were pre-menopause for their lovely menfolk.
It's very much a renewed conversation. I'm not too deep in the tools of the patriarchy conversation, but you can see women who are tools of the patriarchy in this regard, just reinforcing, like it's women now. It was Robert Wilson back then. It's women now reinforcing this. And it goes deep in your brain because I don't know if you remember, but I felt like quite an accelerated aging this spring. Like I just noticed more wrinkles around my mouth and I got seized with a panic. Like for a couple of days,
didn't I?
You said you have to embrace your wrinkles.
And I was like, to love them.
Okay. And I was thinking, if I had gone on estrogen, like I haven't been able to go on it, but in my brain, it was like, this wouldn't be happening if you'd gone on estrogen. And this is terrible. And this is bad. And I, like me, who's like in the middle of this. And then I just had a long conversation with myself, but a realization was like, this is not yours. Like this is not yours. This is coming from outside. You have no way of knowing you are aging. Where is this fear? Where's the panic? It's just an evidence. Did you think that this wasn't going to happen? Did you think that, like, I think it's cute when you turn 50 and then, 50, you're still kind of like young, a baby. It feels like your face changes. I just had a whole thing about it and you helped me. But do I know if I took estrogen, I would never take hormone therapy just so my face wouldn't age because I would weigh any potential risks, and there are risks with any therapy. So I wouldn't take it unless I had compelling reasons to take it. I still might try it because I really feel like to talk about it, it would be good if I did a little stint on it. And Lara Bryden, who's with us in Mental Clarity, one of the most reasonable and smartest people on this conversation, she tries it. And, she's using it and she's like, maybe to help with your gut. And she's kind of like that. But it's this tools of the patriarchy thing is very, very interesting to me. And I cannot stand this hype that happens and this groupthink and this almost bullying if you question what all the cool kids are saying, which is that you need to be on this. I've interviewed I've had like 85 episodes of my podcast. I've only had one doctor say, yep, I think you should be on hormone therapy if you don't have symptoms. Everyone else has said no. So, and
it's a tough one, isn't it?
There's way too many happy, healthy old ladies walking around who are so free, and you just have to look at them acting silly and not caring. I came up with perimenopause and menopause because my friend's husband, he calls her friends the menopause because she hangs out with some older ladies and they have such a ball, and she just like said they don't care at all. And I read, the thing is I did know about perimenopause, but I guess I forgot about it or I blocked it out. I think there was a lot of denial in some of we don't talk about perimenopause. I think there's a little bit of denial. So at 45, maybe I wasn't ready to accept this was happening and I hadn't skipped a period. But I read Christiane Northrup's, that was Oprah's menopause doctor who's since been canceled for her anti-vaxxation views, but had a stellar career in menopause and is a very sort of moderate person on that. I read her book on women's health. And, the way she described what happens to our hormones, it's sort of like it all levels out. Like the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone, all of that levels out to those great days after your period when you just feel like you can take on the world. And I remember closing and going like, okay. And I just filed it away so fully because I thought, okay, like I can live with this. This is going to be great. And that's why I always say it's going somewhere good because you talk to women and they say, yeah. And the other thing is, Rachel, when you go out on the street, like when I go out in the real world and get off social media, I've just been in Canada in a tour, seeing all my friends from university and high school. Like people are struggling, yeah, but they're not always on hormone therapy. Like none of my friends really have taken hormone therapy or feel that they need to. This negative narrative doesn't seem to have extended to them anyway, in my social circle anyway.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. So I know we've got to wind up, although I could talk to you all day. But as we do, what would you most like women to know from what you have experienced and learnt?
I would like you to recognize that you deserve to be in the world, that we need to learn how to give ourselves grace. We need to answer the call for change that's presented here. That's what the hero's journey is, the heroine's journey. In any film or poem or book you've ever read, the hero is called. They don't want to go. They don't want to answer the call. They have many dark nights of the soul. They meet helpers along the way. They meet villains along the way, and they discover themselves along the way. And they bring goodies back to their tribe, and they help other people. That's sort of the essence of the hero's journey. I wrote a screenplay. It's not very good, but that's what I learned in my screenwriting classes. And I would just like women to know that that is so incredibly worth it. I have had the hardest time in the last 10 plus years, and I am almost finished my last year. Like, I'm almost in menopause, and I can feel, it's still rocky. It's still a lot, but I can feel myself lifting in a way that I'm so blown away by. I feel more myself than I've ever been. It's just so worth it. And so please don't ever let anyone tell you that this shouldn't be happening or it's wrong and it needs to be fixed. Use the tools that are available to feel better, for sure. But this is meant to happen.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, follow, and share it. Also, giving a 5-star review really helps get the word out. You'll find the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you can get my book, Magnificent Midlife: Transform Your Middle Years, Menopause and Beyond. Make the very best of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.